The chains around his wrists were cold and heavy as Commander Marcus Cole stood on the auction platform in the slave markets of Vethkora. 3 weeks ago, he had been an officer aboard the diplomatic vessel Artemis, and now he was merchandised to be sold to the highest bidder. The Silithari buyers walked past him with curious expressions on their silver-skinned faces, and their tall, elegant bodies moved like dancers, even when they were simply browsing through slaves. They pointed at him and whispered to each other in their musical language, and Marcus could understand enough to know they were calling him a curiosity and a novelty, and a strange creature from a death world. Humans were rare in this part of the galaxy, and the Silithari did not know what to make of them. Too small for labor, one buyer said with a dismissive wave of her four-fingered hand. Too stubborn to train properly. Another agreed Marcus kept his head high and his eyes forward because he refused to look broken. Even if his ship was destroyed and his crew was dead, and he was alone in a galaxy that saw him as nothing more than an interesting pet. The bidding was slow, and the final price was embarrassingly low. His new owner was a nervous-looking Silithari male who represented a minor noble house, and he hurried Marcus away from the platform like he was embarrassed to be seen purchasing such a cheap slave. "You are a gift," the male explained as they traveled in a small transport vehicle through the winding streets of the capital city. "A gift for who?" Marcus asked. "For the Lady Alindra," the male said, and his voice dropped low like he was sharing a shameful secret. "She is the youngest daughter of House Vathorn, and she collects unusual things." Marcus noticed that the male would not meet his eyes when he spoke about this. Lady Alindra, and there was something in his tone that sounded almost like pity. The estate of House Vathorn was smaller than Marcus expected for a noble family, and it sat on the edge of the city far from the grand palaces he could see glittering in the distance. They led him through empty hallways where the paint was fading, and the decorations looked old and dusty. Finally, they brought him to a garden at the back of the estate, where a lone figure sat among the dying flowers. Lady Alindra was not what Marcus expected. She was young by Silithari standards, and her silver skin was paler than the others he had seen, and she seemed somehow smaller and more fragile. When she looked up at him, her large violet eyes held no cruelty and no arrogance, and only a deep and weary sadness. "Another gift," she said quietly, and her voice was soft like she was not used to speaking loudly. "They send me broken things because they think I am broken too." The servant who brought. Marcus bowed quickly and left without another word, and Marcus found himself alone with this strange, sad princess. "I am not broken," Marcus said. Alindra tilted her head and looked at him with something like curiosity. "No," she agreed after a long moment. "No, I do not think you are." She did not give him cruel orders or harsh punishments, and instead she simply let him exist. In her forgotten corner of the estate, days passed, and Marcus learned the truth about his new owner. Alindra was considered defective by Silithari standards because she was born smaller and weaker than her siblings, and she tired easily and could not perform the physical feats that her people considered basic. Her family kept her hidden away like a shameful secret, and the servants treated her with barely concealed contempt, and visiting nobles pretended she did not exist. Marcus had seen bullying before, and he had seen people cast aside and forgotten, and watching it happen to Alindra made something angry burn in his chest. One evening, 3 Silithari arrived at the estate, and Marcus recognized them as young nobles by their expensive clothing and cruel smiles. They were Alindra's cousins, and they had come to deliver what they called a lesson in proper behavior. "You embarrassed us at the council meeting," the tallest one said as he grabbed Alindra's arm roughly. "You spoke when you should have stayed silent. I only answered a question that was asked of me." Alindra whispered, and her voice trembled with fear. "You should have said nothing." The cousin snarled, and he pulled out a neural lash from his belt. Marcus knew what a neural lash could do, because he had seen them used on other slaves, and the weapon scent Waves of agony through the ciliary nervous system and left victims writhing in pain for hours. The cousin raised the weapon, and Alindra closed her eyes and waited for the blow. Marcus did not think about what he was doing. He simply moved his body came between Alindra and the lash, and the weapon struck him across the back with a crack of blue energy. Pain exploded through every nerve in his body, and it felt like fire and ice and lightning all at once, and for a moment his vision went completely white. But Marcus had grown up on Earth, where humans learned to endure pain from the moment they were born, and his body had evolved on a world that was considered a death trap by galactic standards. He stayed standing. The three cousins stared at him with shock on their faces, because no slave had ever stepped between them and their target before, and no creature should be able to take a neural lash and remain on their feet. "What are you doing?" the tall cousin demanded. "My job," Marcus said through gritted teeth as his whole body shook with residual pain. "Protecting my lady." The cousins looked at each other with uncertainty, and then back at the human who refused to fall. "This is not over," the tall one said, but his voice had lost its confidence. They left quickly, and Marcus finally allowed himself to drop to one knee as the pain continued to pulse through his body. He felt gentle hands on his shoulders and looked up to see Alindra kneeling beside him with tears streaming down her silver cheeks. "Why did you do that?" she asked, and her voice broke on the words. "No one has ever done that for me." Marcus looked at this alien princess who had shown him kindness when she had no reason to, and who lived in a prison of her own family's making because you did not deserve it. He said simply. Alindra helped him to his feet, and for the first time since he had arrived, she smiled, and it transformed her whole face like the sun breaking through clouds. "You are a strange creature, Marcus Cole," she said. "I have been called worse." Marcus replied. That night Alindra tended his wounds with careful hands and expensive medicine that she normally saved for herself, and Marcus knew that something had changed between them. He had found something worth protecting, and she had found something she never expected to have hope. Word spread through the noble houses like fire through dry grass. The human slave who could not be broken, and the defective princess who now had a protector, became the most interesting gossip in the capital. At first, it was just whispers and rumors. But then the challengers began to arrive. Every rival house that wanted to humiliate House Raythorn saw an opportunity, and every noble who had ever looked down on Alindra now had a new game to play. They came with excuses and false smiles and invented insults that demanded punishment, and every single time they expected the human to step aside. Every single time Marcus refused, Lord Vathus of House Crimson arrived first with an energy whip that was designed to burn through Slithery skin like acid, and he demanded satisfaction for some imagined slight from Alindra at a party she had never attended. Marcus took the whip across his chest, and the pain was incredible, and his human skin burned and blistered, but he did not scream, and he did not fall. Lady Morthen came next with a gravity crusher that was meant to bring victims to their knees under 10 times normal weight, and she claimed Alindra had looked at her with disrespect. Marcus felt his bones creak and his muscles tear under the pressure, but he stayed standing, and he met the shocked lady's eyes until she released the device and fled. Then came the nerve toxins and the sonic disruptors and the psychic needles and weapons that Marcus had never even heard of before. Human physiology was different from Slithery biology in ways that the aliens did not understand, and the toxins that would paralyze their nervous systems were merely painful to Marcus, and the frequencies that would shatter their concentration only gave him headaches. It still hurt, though. Every night Marcus returned to Alindra's quarters with new wounds and new scars, and every night she waited for him with medicine and bandages and hands that shook with guilt. "You have to stop this," she begged him one evening as she cleaned a deep cut across his shoulder. "They will kill you eventually, and I'm not worth dying for." Marcus looked at her reflection in the mirror and saw the tears on her silver cheeks. "Do you know what I was before they captured me?" He asked. You were a commander, Alindra said. A soldier on a ship. I was a coward, Marcus said, and his voice was flat and empty. When our ship was attacked, I gave orders that got my crew killed, and when the enemy boarded us, I hid while my people fought and died. Alindra's hands stopped moving on his shoulder. The Silithari slavers found me hiding in a storage compartment. Marcus continued. I was the only survivor because I was too afraid to fight. That does not make you a coward. Alindra said softly. I have been running my whole life. Marcus said, and he turned to face her, running from bad orders and from my own failures and from the ghosts of everyone I let down. He took her hands in his and looked into her violet eyes. I am done running, he said. You showed me kindness when you had every right to treat me like dirt, and for the first time in years, I have something worth standing for. Alindra did not know what to say, and so she said nothing and simply held his hands as tears fell silently down her face. The attacks continued, but something else began to change as well. Alindra started to stand differently, and her shoulders were straighter and her head was higher, and when nobles came to torment her, she met their eyes. Instead of looking at the floor at a formal dinner where she had always sat silent and invisible, she spoke up to correct the Lord, who was spreading lies about human capabilities. My human has taken every weapon you have thrown at him, she said in a voice that carried across the room. Perhaps you should consider that your assumptions about weakness are wrong. The room went silent, and Marcus felt something warm spread through his chest that had nothing to do with his healing. She had called him her human, but she had said it with pride instead of ownership. The other servants in the household began to change too. They had always ignored Alindra and treated her with barely hidden contempt, but now they watched Marcus with curious eyes and whispered among themselves. Young servant named Korath approached Marcus one night while he was sitting alone in the garden. Why do you do it? Korath asked. Do what? Suffer for her, Korath said, and his voice was genuinely confused. She is not powerful, and she cannot reward you, and she cannot protect you from what they do to you. Marcus thought about the question for a long moment. Where I come from, he said finally. We have a saying that the measure of a person is how they treat those who can do nothing for them. Korath tilted his head in confusion. Alindra was kind to me when she had nothing to gain from it. Marcus continued. She treated me like a person when everyone else treated me like property, and that matters more than power or rewards. But she is weak. Korath said. She is kind, Marcus replied. And kindness takes more strength than cruelty ever will. Korath left without another word, but Marcus noticed that he bowed to Alindra the next morning and called her my lady with genuine respect. In his voice it was a small thing, but small things have a way of growing. The Queen's spies had been watching since the first rumors began to spread, and they reported everything they saw to the throne. They reported about the human who could not be broken, and the princess who was learning to stand tall, and the servants who were beginning to show loyalty that no one had commanded them to feel. Queen Valithra had ruled the Silithari dominion for 300 years, and she had seen many strange things. But she had never seen anything quite like this, a human teaching her people about strength through suffering, a weak princess becoming something more, loyalty given freely instead of demanded by power. The queen decided that she needed to see this for herself, and so she sent a summons to House Vathorn that would change everything. When the official messenger arrived with the golden seal of the throne, Alindra went pale with fear. She is going to kill us, she whispered. Marcus looked at the summons and then at his princess, and he squared his shoulders despite the pain that still lingered from his latest wounds. Then we will face her together, he said, and for the first time Alindra did not argue or tell him to save himself. She simply nodded and took his hand. Whatever came next, they would face it side by side. The royal palace was called the Throne of Thorns, and when Marcus first saw it, he understood why. The massive structure rose from the center of the capital, like a frozen explosion of crystal and metal, and its towers twisted toward the sky like reaching fingers covered in sharp decorative spines. Everything about it was designed to make visitors feel small and afraid, and it worked perfectly. Alindra walked beside him through the endless corridors, and her hand trembled in his, but she did not run, and she did not hide. Guards in silver armor watched them pass with cold curiosity, and courtiers whispered behind decorative fans, and every eye in the palace seemed to follow the disgraced princess and her human pet they were led to. The throne room where Queen Valithra waited. Marcus had seen images of the queen before, but nothing had prepared him for the reality of her presence. She was ancient by Silithari standards, with skin that had darkened to a deep metallic gray and eyes that burned like captured stars, and she sat on a throne of black crystal that seemed to drink the light around it. Power radiated from her like heat from a sun, and Marcus felt his instincts screaming at him to kneel and beg and make himself as small as possible. He stayed standing. "So," the queen said, and her voice was like silk wrapped around steel, "this is the human who cannot be broken. Your Majesty." Alindra began, but the queen raised one hand and silenced her instantly. "I did not summon you to hear you speak, child," the queen said without looking at her great-granddaughter. "I summoned you to observe." She rose from her throne and walked toward Marcus with steps that made no sound on the crystal floor, and stopped close enough that he could see the ancient wisdom and terrible patience in her eyes. "You have caused quite a disruption in my court," she said. "I apologize, Your Majesty." Marcus replied, "No, you do not," the queen said, and something like amusement flickered across her face. "You are not sorry at all." Marcus said nothing because she was right. The queen circled him slowly like a predator examining prey, and her eyes missed nothing as they catalogued every scar and every healed wound on his body. "I have ruled this dominion for 3 centuries, she said. "I have seen empires rise and fall and species come and go, and in all that time, I have never seen a slave willingly suffer for a master who could offer nothing in return. She is not my master," Marcus said. The queen stopped and tilted her head with curiosity. "Then what is she to you?" Marcus thought carefully about his answer, because he knew that the wrong words could mean death for both of them. "She is someone worth protecting," he said finally. "Why?" the queen demanded. "She is weak by our standards and powerless and forgotten, and what could possibly make her worth the pain you have endured?" "Because she was kind when she had no reason to be," Marcus said. "Because she treated me like a person when everyone else treated me like property, and because kindness should be rewarded, not punished." The queen studied him for a long moment, and then she laughed. It was not a cruel laugh, but it was not entirely friendly either, and it echoed through the throne room like breaking glass. "How fascinating," she said. "A human who believes in kindness." She returned to her throne and sat down with elegant grace. "I am going to offer you a choice, human," she said, "and I want you to think very carefully before you answer." Marcus braced himself for whatever was coming. "I will give you your freedom," the queen said. "A ship and safe passage back to human space, and enough wealth to live comfortably for the rest of your short life." Marcus felt his heart stop for a moment, because freedom was everything he had dreamed about since the day he was captured. "All you have to do," the queen continued, "is walk away from her." She gestured lazily toward Alindra, who stood frozen with fear and hope and despair, all warring on her face. "Leave now and never return," the queen said. "Forget that she exists and go back to your own people and never think about this place again." Marcus looked at Alindra and saw the tears forming in her violet eyes, and he knew that she expected him to take the offer, because why would anyone choose suffering over freedom? He thought about Earth and about the stars he used to navigate by, and about the family he had not seen in years, and the life he could have if he just walked away. Then he thought about the nights Alindra had spent tending his wounds, and the way she smiled when he made her laugh, and the way she had started to stand taller and speak louder because someone finally believed in her. "No," Marcus said. The word hung in the air like a challenge. "No," the queen repeated, and her voice was dangerously soft. "With respect, your majesty," Marcus said. "Your offer is generous, but I must decline." "You would refuse freedom?" the queen asked. "Freedom means nothing if I have to abandon someone who trusted me to earn it," Marcus said. "Alindra showed me kindness when she had nothing to gain, and I will not repay that by leaving her alone." The queen leaned forward on her throne, and her ancient eyes burned with an intensity that made Marcus want to look away. "She is nothing," the queen said. "Weak blood and a dead branch of my dynasty, and why would you suffer for something so worthless?" Marcus felt anger rise in his chest, and he knew that his next words might be his last, but he could not stay silent. "With respect, your majesty," he said, "you are wrong." The throne room went completely silent, and every guard and courtier held their breath. "She is not worthless," Marcus continued. "She has never been worthless, and she has only been made to believe that by people who were too blind to see her value." "And you see her value?" the queen asked. "I see someone who was beaten down her entire life and still chose to be kind," Marcus said. "I see someone who had every reason to become cruel and bitter and instead remained gentle, and I see someone who just needed one person to believe in her. And you gave her that belief?" The queen said. "No," Marcus replied. "I just showed her what it looks like when someone thinks she is worth protecting, and she did the rest herself." The queen was silent for a very long time, and Marcus could not read her expression at all. Finally, she waved her hand in dismissal. "You may go," she said. "Both of you," Marcus blinked in surprise, because he had expected punishment or death or anything other than simply being sent away. "Your Majesty," he began. "I said go," the queen repeated, and her voice held a note of finality that allowed no argument as they were escorted from the throne room. Marcus looked back once and saw the queen watching them with an expression he could not identify. She was curious now, and Marcus realized with a chill that a curious queen might be far more dangerous than an angry one. The weeks following their audience with the queen were strangely peaceful. No nobles came to torment Alindra, and no weapons were raised against Marcus, and for the first time since he had become a slave, he was able to rest and heal properly. But Marcus knew better than to trust the silence. He had been a soldier long enough to recognize the calm before a storm, and every day that passed without incident made him more certain that something terrible was coming. The change in Alindra continued to grow like a flower finally given sunlight after years in darkness. She attended court functions that she had always avoided, and she spoke with confidence to nobles who had once ignored her. And she began to make allies among the younger members of houses who were tired of the cruel traditions of their elders. The servants of House Vathorn had transformed as well. Korath, the young servant who had questioned Marcus in the garden, now led a group of household staff who showed genuine loyalty to Alindra, and they called themselves the Chosen because they had chosen to follow her rather than being forced. Marcus watched these changes with pride and with worry, because he knew that every step Alindra took toward power made her more of a threat to those who wanted to keep her down. The attack came during the Festival of Starlight. It was the largest ceremonial gathering of the year, and every noble house was required to attend, and even Alindra could not avoid it. Marcus stood behind a chair in the great hall and watched the crowds of silver-skinned Scifistories eating and drinking and dancing, and his soldier's instincts screamed warnings that he could not quite identify. Something was wrong. He scanned the room and noted the positions of the guards and the locations of the exits and the servants moving through the crowd with trays of food and drink. There, a servant near the eastern wall who moved differently than the others and whose eyes kept flicking toward Alindra with too much focus, and there another one by the main entrance whose hands were hidden beneath his tray in a way that suggested he was holding something other than dishes. Marcus counted 7 of them positioned throughout the hall, and all of them were watching Alindra, and all of them were waiting for something. "My lady," Marcus said quietly, and he leaned close to Alindra's ear. "We need to leave now." Alindra looked up at him with confusion. "What is wrong?" she asked. "Assassins," Marcus said. "7 of them, and they are going to move soon." Alindra's face went pale, but she did not panic, and she did not scream, and instead, she simply nodded and began to rise from her chair, but she was too slow. The assassins saw her movement and decided to strike early, and suddenly, 7 figures were pushing through the crowd with weapons appearing in their hands like magic. Marcus grabbed Alindra and threw her behind him as the first assassin lunged with a crystalline blade that hummed with deadly energy. The blade caught Marcus across the arm, and pain exploded through his body, but he had felt worse, and he grabbed the assassin's wrist and twisted until bones snapped. The second assassin came from the left with a neural disruptor, and Marcus took the blast to his side as he put himself between the weapon and Alindra. His muscles seized and his vision blurred, but he forced himself to keep moving, and he drove his elbow into the assassin's throat. The third and fourth came together, and one of them managed to put a knife into Marcus's shoulder, while the other tried to get around him to reach Alindra. Marcus grabbed the knife in his shoulder and pulled it free and used it to slash across the nearest assassin's face. Blood was pouring from his wounds now, and every breath felt like fire, and his body was screaming at him to stop and rest. But he could not stop because Alindra was behind him, and she would die if he fell. Fifth assassin was bigger than the others and stronger, and he hit Marcus with a blow that cracked ribs and sent him stumbling. But Marcus had grown up on Earth, where gravity was strong and the air was thick and the predators were fast, and humans had evolved to take damage that would kill other species. He stayed standing. He always stayed standing. The sixth assassin hesitated when he saw his companions falling, and that hesitation cost him his life as Marcus drove the stolen knife into his chest. The seventh assassin turned to run, but he never made it to the door. Korath appeared from nowhere and brought his serving tray down on the assassin's head with enough force to drop him instantly. Marcus looked around in shock and saw that other servants had joined the fight, and they were restraining the surviving assassins with makeshift weapons and fierce determination on their faces. "For Lady Alindra," Korath shouted, and the other servants took up the cry. Marcus felt his legs finally give out, and he collapsed to the floor as his body decided that it had been pushed far enough. The last thing he saw before darkness took him was Alindra standing over him with a weapon in her hand that she had taken from a fallen assassin, and fire in her eyes that he had never seen before. "No one touches him," she snarled at the crowd of shocked nobles. No one, and no one did. Marcus woke 3 days later in a medical facility that was far nicer than anything he had seen since his capture, and Alindra was sitting beside his bed with dark circles under her eyes that told him she had not left his side. "You almost died," she said, and her voice was thick with emotion. "Almost does not count," Marcus replied. "This is not a joke," Alindra said, and tears spilled down her silver cheeks. "You almost died for me, and I cannot keep watching you suffer." Marcus reached out and took her hand. "Did you see them?" he asked. "The servants who fought with me?" Alindra nodded. "They chose to protect you," Marcus said, "not because anyone ordered them to, and not because they would be punished if they did not. And they chose to risk their lives for you because they believed you were worth saving. Because of you." Alindra said, "No," Marcus said firmly. "Because of you, and because you showed them kindness and you treated them like people, and you proved that loyalty freely given is stronger than loyalty forced." In the royal palace, the queen watched recordings of the battle for the 7th time. She watched Marcus take wound after wound and refuse to fall, and she watched servants choose to fight for a princess who had never commanded anything from them. She watched her great-granddaughter stand over her fallen protector with murder in her eyes, and she saw something that she had not seen in centuries: real loyalty, real strength, and she began to make plans. The nobles responsible for the assassination attempt were found within a week, They were members of 3 rival houses who had decided that Elindra's growing influence was too dangerous to ignore, and they had paid a heavy price for their failure. The Queen's justice was swift and absolute. The heads of all 3 houses were executed in the public square, and their families were stripped of their titles, and their wealth and their assets were divided among the loyal houses. The message was, "Clear touch what belongs to the throne, and you will be destroyed." But everyone in the court expected the matter to end, and they expected Alindra to be quietly discarded, and Marcus to be sold off, and the embarrassment to be buried and forgotten. They were wrong. 1 month after the assassination attempt, a royal summons arrived at House Baythorn, and this time it was not just for Alindra and Marcus. The entire household was commanded to appear before the Queen. Marcus stood in the throne room once again, but this time he was not alone. Alindra stood beside him in formal robes that she had never been allowed to wear before, and behind them stood Korath and the other servants who had chosen to fight for her. The court was packed with nobles from every major house, and they whispered and gossiped and wondered what the Queen was planning. Queen Valithra rose from her throne, and the room went instantly silent. "I have ruled this dominion for 300 years," she said, and her voice carried to every corner of the room. "I have seen strength in many forms, and I have seen weakness pretend to be strength, and I have learned to tell the difference." She walked down from her throne and stopped in front of Marcus. "When I first heard about this human," she said, "I thought he was a curiosity and nothing more, and I thought his defiance was stubbornness and his loyalty was foolishness." Marcus said nothing and kept his eyes forward. "I was wrong," the Queen said. A murmur ran through the crowd, because the Queen never admitted to being wrong about anything. "This human has shown my people something that we had forgotten," she continued. "He has shown us that true strength is not about power or status or the ability to cause pain, and he has shown us that protection freely given is worth more than protection demanded by authority." She turned to address the assembled. "Nobles, I am making an announcement that will change the laws of this dominion," she said. "From this day forward, the human known as Marcus Cole is declared crown property." Marcus felt his heart sink because crown property was still property, and he had hoped for something more. But the Queen was not finished. "As crown property, he is under my personal protection," she said. "No one may harm him, and no one may command him, and no one may buy or sell or trade him, and he answers to no one except the throne itself." The nobles exchanged confused glances, because this was not how crown property worked. Furthermore, the Queen said, "He is granted the status of protected person, which means that any attack on him is an attack on the crown itself." Marcus understood now, and the Queen had not made him a slave of the throne, but had instead given him the closest thing to freedom that existed in Silithary law. "And there is one more matter to address," the Queen said, and she turned to look at Alindra. Alindra trembled, but she did not look away. "My great-granddaughter has spent her entire life being told that she is weak and worthless and a disgrace to her bloodline," the Queen said. "I must confess that I believe these things as well." She walked toward Alindra and stopped directly in front of her. "I was wrong about that too," she said. The Queen reached up and removed a silver circlet from her own head and placed it on Alindra's brow. "You have done something that I thought was impossible," she said quietly so that only Alindra and Marcus could hear. "You inspired loyalty in those who had no obligation to give it, and that is more valuable than any strength of body or mind." She stepped back and raised her voice to address the crowd. "Lady Alindra is hereby elevated to the rank of Grand Duchess," she announced. "She will serve as my personal advisor on matters of internal loyalty, and she will have authority over all household staff in the royal palace." The crowd erupted in shocked whispers because Alindra had gone from forgotten disgrace to one of the most powerful people in the Dominion in a single moment. "Any questions?" the Queen asked, and her tone made it clear that there had better not be any. There were none. After the ceremony, Marcus found himself alone with Alindra in a private garden within the palace. "I cannot believe this is real," Alindra said. "And?" She was still touching the circlet on her head, like she expected it to disappear. "You earned it," Marcus said. "We earned it." Alindra corrected him. An attendant appeared and bowed deeply to Alindra. "Your Grace," the attendant said, "a delegation from the Human Confederacy has arrived, and they are requesting an audience." Marcus felt his shoulders heart skip because the Human Confederacy was his government and his people, and they had finally come looking for survivors of the Artemis. The delegation was led by Ambassador Chun, and she looked at Marcus with shock and recognition. "Commander Cole," she said, "we thought you were dead, and we have been searching for survivors for months, and we never expected to find you here." "Ambassador," Marcus replied, and he stood at attention out of old habit. "We have negotiated with the Queen," Ambassador Chun said. "She has agreed to release any human slaves in the Dominion, and you can come home." "Commander," Marcus looked at Alindra and saw the fear in her eyes and the resignation, and she expected him to leave, because why would anyone stay when they could finally go home? "She has offered you citizenship," Ambassador Chun continued, "and restoration of your rank and a full pension, and you can finally rest." "With respect, Ambassador," Marcus said, "I must decline." The ambassador blinked in surprise. "I am sorry," she said. "Did you say decline? I have a duty here." Marcus said, "I am sworn to protect the Grand Duchess, and I will not abandon that oath." "Commander, you do not have to stay," the ambassador said. "Whatever they have done to you, whatever they have made you believe, you are free now." "I know I am free," Marcus said, "and I am choosing to stay." He looked at Alindra and saw the tears streaming down her face and the hope blooming in her eyes. "I have been running my whole life," he said, "running from my failures and my ghosts and my own cowardice. But I am not running anymore." He took Alindra's hand in his. "I found something worth staying for," he said. "I found a home." Ambassador Chun looked between them, and slowly understanding dawned on her face. "I see," she said softly. "Then I wish you well, Commander, and know that the Confederacy will always welcome you if you change your mind." "Thank you, Ambassador," Marcus said, "but I will not change my mind." After the delegation left, Alindra turned to Marcus with wonder on her face. "You really stayed," she said. "You could have gone home, and you stayed." "I told you before," Marcus said. "I am home." She laughed, and it was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. And then she hugged him tightly, and he held her close, and for the first time in years he felt truly at peace. In her private chambers, the Queen watched them through a viewing screen, and a small smile crossed her ancient face. "Interesting," she murmured to herself. "Very interesting indeed." She had ruled for 3 centuries, and she would rule for centuries more, and now she had something new to study. A human who taught her people about loyalty, a princess who learned to stand tall, and a revolution built on small kindnesses that was only just beginning. The Queen turned off the screen and began to plan for the future, because she had not survived this long without knowing how to recognize valuable assets when she saw them. And Marcus Cole was the most valuable asset she had found in a very long time.